for joining us. Today we have Sierra Greene with UAF, and she's going to be talking to us about her upcoming project that she's working on. And she is joined by Aaron Jones, who's hiding incognito. He works for Alaska Sea Grant out in Kodiak. I'm going to pass it over to Sierra.
Sweet, thanks. Thank you guys for having us. We're in town working on getting our new project up and running. So we're super excited to kind of tell you about what we got going on and what's to come in the next couple of years around here. So yeah, so this talk is going to be mostly about mariculture and essentially what's happening in the waters around our crops that kind of help them grow, and how do the crops kind of change the water in effect. So yeah. So to give you a little bit of a background, I am pretty recently fresh up here. I moved up in June to start my master's work here down in Juneau studying mariculture. Before that, I've been mostly working with water quality sensors, looking for harmful algal blooms in coastal Florida. So a lot of different technical stuff, which has kind of got me involved in this project, but with a new focus that I'm super excited about, which is mariculture. So kind of an overview of the talk today. We'll look at what mariculture is and what it's currently looking like in Alaska. Kind of an overview of our project and where it's taking place, and then break down into the kind of the nitty-gritty of what Aaron and I are doing, looking into the different water quality parameters. And then we'll bring Aaron up and he'll kind of talk about how we designed the array that we're putting at all of the sites and what that looks more like. So mariculture, I'm sure many of you in the audience here in Cordova are pretty familiar with this setting. So mariculture in Alaska means the growing of shellfish and seaweeds for economic enhancement and restoration of the environment. So in Alaska, it's not legal to farm finfish, so we're not looking at anything with backbone. We're just looking at seaweeds and shellfish. And when it's done correctly, it can be super beneficial to the environment. You can have kelp growing and taking up extra nutrients from the water that can sometimes be harmful. You have oysters filtering the water to get make it a little bit more clear. And it's super duper, it can be very economically beneficial if we start to build up the programs for it. So currently in the state of Alaska, there are 81 aquatic farm permits, which just is a kind of encompassing of shellfish and seaweeds. And 49 of those currently are marketing their products. So two of the main things that we're going to be focusing on are oysters and seaweeds. There are some different shellfish like mussels and clams that can be grown in the waters here as well. But for our purposes, we're going to stick with oysters, and specifically the Pacific oyster, which is not native to Alaska, but was brought in for aquaculture and does really well in our cold waters here. So the Pacific oyster, and it's not really new to aquaculture here. We've kind of been building up a trend, and we saw our largest growths kind of between the 2016, 2017, 2018 era, and then as Aaron pointed out earlier, a little bit of a decline right around the COVID-19 era, which is pretty popular in just about everything. But you can look at this graph and see that there is a pretty good base for oysters and oyster sales. The other aspect we're looking at are seaweeds, are different growths of kelp, and as you can tell, it's a brand new industry up here. Just kind of got rolling in 2017, and the main crops that are grown are sugar kelp, ribbon kelp, and a little bit of bowl kelp. So very new, very fresh industry with a lot of potential. So what does an aquatic farm look like? If you're not really familiar with aquatic farms in general, they can kind of take on whatever form you have the materials for. This is an oyster farm in Homer that we're working with called Bootlegger's Cove, and he has his whole system set off of a dock. So The dock's been in place, and you can see the dropper lines are lantern cages that he hangs over, grows his oysters, and then when it's time to harvest, walks out to the dock and pulls them up. The same farmer at a different site in Homer also has a setup for oysters that's just completely buoys. It's lines of buoys with the cages dropped and hung from them. And that's pretty similar to what kelp farms look like as well. This is a local kelp farm, Royal Ocean Kelp Company here in Cordova. And it's pretty much all buoys and rope from the surface, and then kind of strung between all of the buoys are the grow lines for the kelp. So the lines that actually have the seeds, and then they'll kind of drop down into the water, and the kelp will grow down. And then this is another farm that we're working with in Kodiak, Alaska Oceans Farm, and you can kind of get a good idea of what the kelp lines look like. So here you can see it has a bar, a metal bar, and then the grow lines kind of come out of that. And then when they go to harvest, they detach those lines, bring them up, and then cut off all the kelp and kind of smush it into totes to be further processed. So why do we care about any of this? Why do we care about mariculture in general, and what good could it be for us? Well, in Alaska, as everyone in the audience knows, can be a really great place to grow things. You've got a lot of sheltered bays, you've got really crisp, clear water that's really great for growth. And you've got a fantastic skill set. You've got pretty much all of the know-how to grow. A lot of retired fishermen or off-season fishermen can kind of shift over and do this in the off-season to supplement their income. So our project in particular is working in Cordova, Kodiak, and Homer, all areas of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. So a big goal of this project is to create sustainable mariculture to kind of build up the habitats back in these areas as well. So with all of this potential in the water, we have a lot of questions that need answering before it can really reach its potential. So globally, there is a need for some of these products. Kelp can be turned into fertilizers, animal feed, pharmaceuticals, just regular old products like Barnacle Seafood makes some really cool kelp products. But the markets still need to really be built up in this area. So our project, the Mariculture Research and Restoration Consortium, it's kind of a mouthful, we call it Mariculture Recon, kind of looks at the whole picture of mariculture within the spill zone here, kind of from top to bottom, and it's really large encompassing project with partners from all over the state, including the Science Center here and the native village of Kodiak in Cordova. So this project can kind of be broken down into a couple different components. I think it's really exciting because it looks at every facet of the industry right now. There's different outreach programs like this, or with farmers for workshops, and looking at what stakeholders and community members hold value in, and how we kind of develop those. Also, product development is a huge one. Local Alaskan products made out of kelp and shellfish, working on those and then pushing them into larger scale. Economics, obviously a huge one if you're going to get into this. How do you make money with it? What systems need to be put in place? If you have any questions on that, Aaron's your guy. Is it feasible where we're at right now, or what needs to happen to kind of make it built up and more feasible to get involved? Farm production, a lot of our scientists and researchers on the project are partnering with local farmers to kind of look at what methods they're using, how effective they are, where are they getting their seed from. Can we start to produce local seed that can be used? And then biological communities, that means just like all the areas around the farms. Are the farms affecting the fish in the area? Are they affecting the floor, the sea floor? Are they having any kind of effect that we weren't before sure about, that we kind of should take in mind when we start to new farms into more areas? And then the physiochemical environment, and that's where we come in. This is essentially just all of the waters happening around the growth. What are they doing? How are they affecting the growth? How is the growth affecting the waters? And to do this, we have these sensors that we're going to put out, and we're also going to be growing kelp and oysters at every site to try and kind of compare the sites. So looking at the different sites, like I said, it's all within the spill zone here. We've got a couple of sites down in Kodiak, some in Kachemak Bay, and some in Prince William Sound. And it's all kind of a mixture of farms already growing seaweed or farms already growing oysters. And when we were trying to choose partner farms, we were kind of trying to choose ones that were all very different from each other. Do they have different freshwater influences? Do they have different sunlight coming to them? What's the use like in the areas around there? So we're working with 2 seaweed farms here and 1 oyster farm across the island. And then in Kachemak Bay, it's mostly oyster farms, and then 1 farm that's permitted and currently is growing both. So a good chunk of oysters, but then also a fair amount of kelp being grown too. And then here in Prince William Sound near Cordova, we're working with 3 local partner farms, Simpson Bay Oyster Company up in Simpson Bay, Royal Ocean Kelp Company growing kelp in Windy Bay, and then the Native Village of EX Research Kelp Array. All right, so the physiochemical environment is pretty much just a long way of saying what is the water like around the crops that we're growing. So this is a farm in Homer, Spinnaker Seed Farms, that currently is growing kelp and oysters. And we essentially just want to know what water quality, if we look at all the different sites, are helping these crops grow the best. And in turn, if we're looking at sites in one area versus areas without any aquaculture, is that mariculture kind of changing what the water looks like? So to do this, this is our production array that we've been putting out at all of our farm sites. We're in Homer last week, and now here in Cordova. So what it encompasses here is a backbone structure with buoys to hold it afloat, and then kelp dropper lines of sugar kelp that hang down about 13 feet. And then in the middle, a bunch of different water quality sensors that we're going to get a little more into that kind of just measure everything that could be affecting the growth of that kelp. And then in the spring, we plan to put on oysters right along the backbone and try and start to look at the relationship between growing the oysters and the kelp together like that. So right now, we've worked to get these arrays deployed inside of all the farms. And then next year, we're going to work to put arrays on the outside of the farm to try and look at the differences between where the kelp and oysters are affecting our growth versus where there will not be so much outside effects of the growth with other products. So getting into a little bit more of our sensors that we're working with and what parts of the water we're actually going to measure. We call them the abiotic conditions, so the non-living things around the farm sites and in the farm sites. So we'll kind of work down each of these different parameters and learn a little bit more about how they can affect growth for both oysters and for kelp and what we kind of need to be mindful of. So the first one to think about is light. Obviously, light is huge for growing kelp. We know that we need it for photosynthesis. And there's 2 different ways that we are starting to look at light and that we'll measure it. And the first one is turbidity, which is pretty much how stirred up is the water. When you're out boating, can you look down and see the sea otter 5 feet below, or can you not see your hand when you put it in the water? How kicked up it is. Are you close to a freshwater output that's going to be putting silt from the delta out to cover your crops, or are you somewhere where it's nice and crystal clear all the time? So it makes sense that kelp favors this nice clear water. It doesn't want anything obstructing the sunlight when it has its fronds out for photosynthesis. And oysters are kind of an interesting case. If you're from the East Coast at all, you're very familiar with this photo. Pacific or Eastern oysters are natural in reefs, and they're huge for water filtering. They can kind of take in small sediment amounts and nutrient runoff and obviously filter the water really clearly around the reefs. It's kind of interesting when you look at turbidity, because too much turbidity for an oyster can kind of overwhelm it, and it has a lower chance of feeding because it kind of gets clogged up with the different sediment in the water, and it can't get to its natural food, phytoplankton, as much. So the other part of light that we're going to look at is called photosynthetic active radiation, or PAR, and it's essentially whatever light comes from the sun, that spectrum of the light that the plant or the kelp can actually use for photosynthesis. So this is really important, especially for kelp, but also looking at phytoplankton, the little tiny plants in the water that the oysters feed from. So essentially when the sun gets higher and higher, and in Alaska, that's a pretty important thing to think about when you're thinking about where you want to put your new farm. We want to really be measuring throughout the whole year, where is the sun, how much of it is actually effectively being used. So if we look at our photosynthesis here, depending on where the sun is, kind of depends on how much growth that kelp can actually get. And if you look at the blades here of the kelp, you can see that they're super duper thin. They're really great for kind of taking in water and nutrients and sun, and really efficient at photosynthesizing if you have enough sunlight there. So what we've put out at all these sites are these little PAR sensors. It essentially is like a reverse light. Every hour it kicks on and it just says how much light is coming in instead of going out. So we'll be looking at that, comparing at every site. The next thing that we want to look at that ties into that photosynthesis is the dissolved oxygen in the water. So the dissolved oxygen is essentially how many oxygen molecules are there that aren't paired to anything else that are up for grabs for living things in the water. Super huge for anything living, especially oysters. Oysters need a fair amount of oxygen in the water. And the good news is that kelps produce oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. So when we start to look at growing those two things together, if your site potentially doesn't have this good mixing of oxygen in the water, then perhaps kelp could be a good solution for that. So when we're looking at dissolved oxygen, there's also a very interesting phenomenon. As the water gets warmer, it's not really able to hold as much oxygen. So that's another interesting thing to keep in mind with your site, would be the temperature of it. So another thing that we'll be measuring for is the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is that part of the plant that actually does the photosynthesis. And for our purposes, we are using it kind of as a proxy for phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are the teeny tiny little microscopic organisms in the water that help put out oxygen in the water, but really importantly, they are the food for oysters. Oysters are filter feeders. They're kind of taking in all the water around them, holding on to that phytoplankton, and that's what they need to feed. So with these sensors out there, we can kind of track what the bloom cycles are and how much food is in the water, essentially, for each of the oysters. So one other thing that we'll be looking for is salinity. And we're going to be taking salinity measurements at the top of the water column and down where the growth is taking place. And this is important, especially at some of the sites here, when you're looking at the different properties of water. Salty water sits a little bit lower, and if you have freshwater influence, it's going to sit right on top. Which is not a bad thing, except for it does kind of affect site selection when you're looking at ice. So this was just the other day at the Simpson Bay Oyster Company here in Cordova. They already had a thin layer of ice over on their site. And we can kind of attribute that to a difference in salinity. So kelp can tolerate a pretty wide range of salinities. They can get stressed out if it's too high or too low for too long, but they don't mind between 23 to 38 It's a pretty good range for them. Another interesting thing to kind of think about when you're looking at where you should put your farm is biofouling. So you can kind of see different organisms latching on to your kelp fronds or your buoys or your lines that you don't want to grow there. And that can be related to salinity. Oysters can also tolerate a really wide range of salinity. If it's too salty or too low, they can get stressed out and close up and they won't filter feed. But it has to be like that for a good amount of time. So they're pretty hardy. The interesting thing with oysters that you have to kind of think about that ties into salinity is a lot of people eat oysters because of the very delicate flavors that you can learn to pick out. I haven't learned to pick them out, but maybe one day. And salinity is a big factor in that. If you think of oysters here versus oysters from Mississippi, Louisiana, kind of areas with a lot of freshwater runoff, people don't really like those oysters as much because they don't have much of a flavor. Versus oysters up here that are coming from fresh, salty waters, have a little bit more of a brininess to them. Or so I've been told. Temperature. So temperature is a huge aspect to look at here. It's kind of the back line characteristic to a lot of these measurements that we're taking. And Alaska, we're pretty cold up here, to all my friends from back in Florida. The water doesn't really get above 60 very often, which is good for kelp and oyster growth. Kelp like cool, clear water. If it gets too tall or too high, it can kind of stress them out a little bit, but they're also pretty hardy. The main concern that we have with temperature when it comes to farming can be harmful algal blooms. So you've probably seen signs around for PSP, paralytic shellfish poisoning, from different shellfish that you can harvest from the beaches or that are grown in local waters. And PSP, a lot of studies have been done trying to kind of target when it's going to strike, how does it bloom in the water, and it's kind of been inconclusive. We're still researching that. One thing that we can know it is tied to is higher temperatures. We'll start to see more intense blooms as waters warm up in the summer, which can be huge and devastating to oyster farmers. They'll have to send in their products every week in the summer to be tested for PSP. Same thing with Vibrio. Vibrio is a type of bacteria that can bloom in the waters and be consumed by oysters, and it's also tied to higher temperatures. It can't survive lower than 60 degrees. So in the summertime, these are some pretty interesting measurements that are super important to consider when you're putting an oyster farm at a new site. And this is a really cool part of the project I'm excited about. These are little sensors that we're giving each of the partner farms that measure the depth, the salinity, and the temperature. So they're able to use these sensors to collect data anywhere around their farm to kind of have this background knowledge of what's going on and what do they need to know before they really put their crops out. So looking at the water column, it's important to know when you're considering where to put a new site, how well is this water being turned over? Is it super stagnant? Like we can see, this was a water profile that I took where I'm living in Juneau that was near a freshwater output. You can see that as we have depth over here, as I dropped the sensor down into the water column, huge change in salinity, right around 10 in the surface where that really fresh water was sitting, with the saltiness down below. So that water wasn't getting really churned up. We didn't see any mixing there. Versus this farm that we're just at in Homer. Similar type of graph. We've got depth going down. But you can look at the salinity chart here, and it's 31.2 at the bottom and right around 31 at the surface. So really well mixed water column. And it was interesting because there was even a little fresh water input at this site, just must have gotten turned over really well. So looking at kind of how the water turns over and how it moves, we're putting out these current sensors at each site as well. So this is kind of showing us how well the water is moving in and kind of changing over. So for kelp, this is really important to know your flow rate. New fresh water in means new nutrients for the kelps to absorb to kind of build up their tissue as they grow. And for oysters, this is important for a similar reason. It's bringing in new phytoplankton for them to feed on, but it's also taking away the waste from the oysters, from their metabolic activity. Instead of kind of settling down and putting more waste in the environment, flow of water can really mix things up, and is super healthy, super helpful for both kelp and for oysters. And then with that, I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, and he's going to give us a little bit more of an in-depth look at the actual arrays that we put up.
Hi, my name's Aaron Jones. I work for Alaska Sea Grant, based out of Kodiak as a marine mariculture technician. I've been with Alaska Sea Grant and in the state for 2 years, so I'm pretty fresh off the boat. So this is the first time to go over. Really enjoying it. It's great to get around and just see the environment. So my talk is probably not as flash as Sarah's talk, but I just want to go through the way I go through a thought process when a project's brought to me, and my supervisors say, Aaron, we need you to work on this, help this person out, and so on like that. And then I come from a commercial background, but I've been working with Sea Grant here and Sea Grant in New Hampshire for a number of years. And so I'm getting used to having students and the academics or scientists come to me and say, hey, we need help with this, can you help it out and progress this project forward. So over time I've developed kind of something, because everything's different. I get the craziest ideas submitted to me, and basically I'm just told, make it work, and I'm off to a hardware store trying to figure out what I can do with a wire or rebar, as I've happened this week. I'm using rebar, and it's a learning curve. There can be sometimes a huge amount of money thrown at a project and a huge amount of wastage, or they can be really organised and they have marine engineers involved, and it can go crazy on the values, over-engineered, under-engineered, or then there can be just, hey, we've got a little bit of pot of money, we really need to answer this really basic question, which I'm all about, is if you answer the simple questions, then you can build on it for them. So, the start, as I said, my boss came to me and said, hey, can you help Sarah with the project? And as I said, that's where I start off on a series of steps to kind of going through with it. So you can't actually see the numbers down here too well, but first off is just to meet with Sarah, talk about her project, what are her goals, her mandate. For me, by that, what I mean is I'm not too clear on what the project is, we're going through it, and she'll say, Aaron, I'm hanging off some very expensive equipment, off some rope, I don't want to lose it, it's going to be in the water for 3 years. Can we make that? And so that's what I mean, mandate. Then I look into budgets, pricing everything out, how stuff can come into Alaska, if I need to barge things in, if I need to, what am I getting best bang for buck? But I also offset it for quality equipment. I generally won't go and buy cheap shackles to replace well-made shackles, just because there's a big price difference. I need something to last a long time, it's important, and that ties in with the mandate. Then we look at timelines. With the mariculture industry, there's some very specific timelines, things have to happen, and I even heard tonight is if you miss certain setups because there's logistical challenges, things haven't turned up, or there's something happened at the nursery, etc., your whole season can be wiped off. So that, and then how we're going to move forward, each of our steps, and just getting, okay, we need to be in this place at this time. And it's a logistical nightmare a lot of times, and we're both learning that moving around Alaska. We were very nervous if we could even get into cold pulled over, but the weather's been so great, I think it's always like this here. Then one of my go-tos is I sleep on it. I mull it over, I pick at it. It takes me a while to think of things and just go, oh, I need to solve this problem. And I've found over time, if I just jump at something and go, I can do this, this is easy. A lot of times I get it wrong. I just need to take time and think about things and like, oh, I spend a lot of time walking into marine supply stores, just walking around. They know me, what are you doing here? Oh, I'm looking at thimbles and I find things. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Hardware stores, trying to get my idea about what I can source. Then I start beginning research. Basically, when I say beginning research, I spend a lot of time on Google Images, because I find that's the best way. I'll put in a keyword and it'll bring up the images and I say, oh, that's something I might be looking for, and then I'll follow that down, and then I'll put a different keyword. And I spend a lot of time and then backtrack actually into the more comprehensive manuals and so on like that. Then I end up drafting a basic design. I do pretty much everything on Excel. I think nobody else does, but I had to teach myself how to do something. I've never been formally trained as an ocean engineer or anything. So I draft up a basic design, which then I can take to Sarah and say, hey, is this something you're thinking about? Move forward. And then the biggest step that I do is I go and start tapping into my network of people. So first one will be a good friend of mine and a kelp farmer, Alpha Pryor from Alaskan Ocean Farms. And he was instrumental in this because I say, hey, what do you think of this? What do you use on your farm? How is this working? We're just tying off a buoy, but that buoy is holding up a $1,000 sensor. What should I think about? And he'll say, think about these ropes, think about this. Do you need chain? I kind of want chain. I don't want chain. And so we do that. And then I start reaching out to my larger community because I did work on the East Coast and I've met a lot of lobstermen working with them and ocean engineers and just people in a similar position as I am doing the builds and things. And I say, what do you think about this? And they always chip in, they're happy because we do a lot of talking back and forth and just coming up with ideas. And it's like, for example, I never knew about soft shackles, and I only recently heard about them this year, and I've seen them put to really good use, as opposed to paying $100 for a large shackle. You can make one out for about $20 at most. Then I carry on. As I said, a lot of time in marine supply stores, looking around what I can access in a timely manner. That one is key, timely manner. That kind of tripped us up here because Air Cargo was supposed to have it to us last week and it just turned up today. So we had to scramble and spend the weekend scrambling and to come up with alternative systems. Design, pen to paper, and then I start filling out this design, factoring in rope thicknesses, if we're using chain, not chain, shackles, what kind of shackles, stainless steel rings, floats, how much flotation, and I'll have multiple spreadsheets on one workbook where I've got all the buoyancy calculations and things, so I can come back and talk about that. And then I'm bouncing ideas off colleagues, finding out, double check with Sarah that this is where she wants to go, because there is no point in me coming up with something and spending days on it and she's going, no, actually that's not what I want. The customer's always right. And then we build, I always like to build a prototype. Sometimes it's not feasible, but this case was quite good because we are going to use that prototype as one of the systems for Kodiak. So it's not like we've bought everything and just thrown it away. And this is in the Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Centre, and it's down in the pilot plant, and I'm just building, here's a prototype sensor array where we mocked up nearly the equivalent weight of how much we're going to be putting out on a single line so we can see any chafing marks and any wear and tear. I was just working, I didn't actually see that coming. Deployment, our site is a little bit more exposed, so we're pretty happy about that because I was going to run it through the systems, and then we did have a number of storms come through. And there it is in the water, and we'd already seen one error here. There wasn't enough flotation, so that was easy. It was like, yeah, I know, I'll bump it up. And then it's adjusting to the different designs of farms. So in our travels in Century Sarah's presentation, you've got the oyster farms, and there were the two designs of that was using a floating structure like a dock system, pontoons, rafts, then long line systems. So they're two different designs, so we have to kind of manipulate and think about how we're doing that. Then the kelp systems, there's multiple different ways, and so we're seeing two of the ways here, which is the dropper lines. That's the through Catlin, and that's a dropper line system. Whereas there's the other ones through Taya was a Kachemak system, which has horizontal lines. Yeah. Anyway, blades go across, and so we have to move them, and then we're talking to the growers and the people, and I'll allude to that in a bit more. It's like, do you want a single array system like this design with anchors sitting on your farm lease, or are you wanting it on your actual system? And a number of them come back and say, we prefer if it's on our system. We don't want more hardware in the water. We don't want to upset our leases or anything like that. So we just do that, and then it's not on the fly, but we're trying to incorporate and adjust as we go. Then it's double checking, make sure everything's all aligned, pack up and then head out to the different farms. And this is a little collage of the different styles we've been to. And then one of my biggest ones is deployment is not a one style fits all. There's different boats. If you've been on landing crafts, Hughes craft, which was 20 foot, so it's tiny, bow pickers here, skiffs, and so you've got to come up, how if I have a 100-pound anchor, how am I getting that up onto the gunnel and off the side if it's just a skiff like this? How will we do that? Can we put weight on the side? All those things. The different farms, which I've alluded to, different weather. Everywhere has a different weather. I don't know. Alaska's a big, huge state, and each bay's got a different weather pattern. So that, and that's where I come into what is key with myself is it's the people's community, it's people's livelihoods that we're coming into and saying, can we do this? And they're helping us, and they're wanting to work with us. We're wanting to work with them. We want to make it work. Therefore, it's the locals' knowledge that I really leverage off about how to do things. Last night we had a conversation, and they're saying, well, the wind's coming from a certain direction. We might not get out. It's perfectly calm. I said, no, it's funneled over this way. Kodiak, I use my weather apps, and I'm looking at my weather apps, and I know it's lined me through its teeth because it says, doesn't take into account there's a huge mountain there, so it's giving a nice sheltered where we can do some work. But because of that mountain and there's a valley, it's funneled in and it goes straight into one of these farms. And I'm not working on that. I can't work on that. It's just dangerous. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea how I work through things. I suppose it's not too much rocket science. It's just a plug-and-play situation. And yeah, thank you for giving me to talk. So any questions?
I have a question for Sierra.
Yeah.
So how are the people going to get that information, or you're going to get the information once you put those sensors in the water? Are they all like floating through the air to, come to you somehow, or?
No, here, I'll yeah, I love my sensors. I'm very excited to talk more about them. So eventually, it would be really cool to move through things flowing through the air, so you can look at them, the data when I'm not around, but.
That's what the shark things were doing, that we have a talk on sharks, and they all had these little.
Oh, yeah,
little
like where it would like
things in the
release.
fins and it would release it and stuff.
Yeah,
so.
no, this isn't that high tech. Unfortunately, they're all logging internally, so I'll program them. All of these sensors that we see are taking a reading once an hour, and then it all just gets stored. And then when we come back in the spring, it's just 6 months worth of data to sort through.
So it has like a little battery or something that'll go for 6 months or 8
Yeah,
months? Or
yeah, so this one,
solar
the salinity and temperature one has a tiny little battery, because it doesn't require much. Same with this, it's just a little lithium. This one, since it's a bigger sensor and it has like a wiper that clears all of the sensing screens, that one has, I didn't include it, but a massive battery pack that holds 16D batteries. Because it's all
Well, that adds
the,
to the weight.
yeah, that's the weight, and all the calculations from that company were like, yeah, it's good for, like 7 months, and I was like, well, what about in temperatures that are like 20 degrees in the winter? And they're like, well, it's good for like 20 days. Yeah, cause this, that can hold 3 batteries, so I'm hoping that the 16 batteries will get us at least to March or so. But yeah, it would be really cool to pivot this eventually to solar panels, or something like that, at least at some of the sites, putting out, a panel and then a modem to send through the cell network for the data, so. Hopefully, in the future, this is just what we could get together for the first year, but this project is supposed to go on for at least 5 years, so, hopefully we'll have a lot of data to share next time we're in town with everyone, but, yeah, we're excited for it.
I have a question. The devices that you gave to the farmers, they were like white with the red.
Yeah.
Did they give the farmers the real-time data?
Yeah.
Is that like an app that it's connected, or do they have to pull the data off of it?
Yeah, exactly. So these sensors run through a tablet that we gave them as well, and you can tell it when to sample through the tablet, and then you just twist the red cap, lower it in the water, bring it up, and then you can view it all through the tablet. It shows you, I should have put a picture of it in there, but something pretty similar to this. It shows you like your depth, what the salinity looked like, and what the temperature looked like. So you can see it right there on the app, and then through that app, they're able to send us that data when they get back into Wi-Fi. And I can look at those files on my computer and manipulate them a little bit more. And if the farmer's interested in doing that, they can do it as well. It just takes an extra step with some software. But.
So how long would they keep it in the water to do those things?
These take samples, 2 samples every second. So what they'll do is they'll get out to their farm, pretty much just lower it down to the bottom and then bring it back up. And what you'll see is just like a big relationship curve between whatever is happening with the salinity and the temperature.
Do they do this like once a day or twice a day or?
It's kind of whenever they get out to their farms. This one is kind of a part of the project that's pretty farmer interactive. Some of the farmers are really curious about their sites. So I was like, great, however often you want to, then get out there, collect all the data you want, to share it with us. And others will, whenever they get out there, like some kelp farmers, and oyster farmers in the winter, only go out once a month or so. Like, okay, whenever you get out, drop it down, just to give us a couple extra data points for folks in this project who are gonna be modeling, kind of just the water movement, in general. The more data points, the better models we can create for each of the areas, so. Yeah, I'm excited about those sensors. I think they're pretty cool, and most of the farmers that we've been working with seem pretty jazzed about them too.